Okay, so in this video, I'm simply going to be going over the Quadratics test review questions. They are already completed. I'm just going to go over them. Use this as you need help just doing individual questions. You do not have to watch all of them. Just kind of fast forward through the video if you need to. All right, so the first one, you're finding each product. That just means you have to multiply this binomial times this binomial. Just to show you real quick, 4m times 5m is 20m squared. 4m times 3 is 12m. Then we start with this 3. 3 times 5m is positive 15m, and 3 times 3 is 9. You have all four of these terms, but these two middle terms, 12m and 15m, are like terms. Put them together, you have 27m. So 20m squared plus 27m plus 9 is the product of this binomial times this binomial, okay? Number two, same kind of thing. You're just doing that same multiplication process. Okay, let me zoom in on number 3 and 4. So here, this asks you to factor. So you're not solving it, but you do have to factor. And remember, you can use your X puzzle. This term right here plus 10, okay? Because this is a 1n squared, we just have to find the factors of 10 that equal negative 11. I've written the factors, and we actually use 1 and 10. I didn't write that in here, but 1 and 10, and they're both negatives because when we put them together, we get the negative 11, and when we multiply them, we get the positive 10, okay? 4 is the same strategy. You find the factors of negative 18 that equal negative 7. I've written the factors. We use negative 9 and 2, so it's p plus 2 and p minus 9, and that's all it means to factor. Now, number 5 was a little bit more difficult. Again, the instructions are just to factor, but since this has a 3 as a coefficient with the b squared term, so the leading coefficient of 3, that means we have to multiply the 3 times the constant 35, and we get 105. So we're actually looking for the factors of 105 that equal 22. Well, I wrote down the factors. By the way, I had to use the calculator for that. And I noticed that 7 and 15 can be added to get 22, so that's the factors I'm using, 15 and 7. However, since this is a 3 and not just a 1, we have to write out all the terms. So 3b squared, that's the first term. Then the 22, which is the plus 15b, plus 7b, and then plus 35. Well, then what we do is we combine these first two. Okay, we group them, and then we group the last two, okay? And then we factor out the greatest common factor in this term here. So we factor out the 3b. They both, this one has a 3b squared, and this one has a 15, and 3 times 5 is 15. So we factor out the b and the 3, and what is remaining is b plus 5. 3b minus b is 3b squared, 3b minus, or times 5 is plus 15b. Then, in this one, 7b plus 35, we factor out the 7 because they both have a factor of 7. And then we'd be left with b plus 5. And what you have here is this common binomial of b plus 5. So 3b plus 7 and b plus 5. All right, number 6. This one, all you're asked to do is factor it. And the point of this one is just to see the common factor of m. So we have an m squared here and a minus 2m, so we take out the m, and then what's left is a 3m minus 2. And then we're actually done, okay, because you're just factoring. Okay, now we get into solving. So let's look at number 7. 7 and 8. Okay, so number 7, x minus 1 and x plus 5. It's asking you to solve, so you don't have to. This is not multiplying binomials, okay? It's been factored for you already and set equal to 0. So you need this set of parentheses, x minus 1, to equal 0. Well, if we just write x minus 1 equals 0 as an equation, and to solve for x, you isolate it. So you get rid of minus 1 by adding 1 to both sides, and you get x equals positive 1. Now you could just think 1 minus 1 is 0. That's why x equals 1. In the second set of parentheses, or binomial, x plus 5, we set that equal to 0. We subtract 5 from both sides, and x equals negative 5. Again, negative 5 plus 5 equals 0, so 1 and negative 5 are the solutions. Okay, in number 8 here, 8 minus 4, I'm sorry, a minus 4 times 4a plus 1, and it equals 0. So it's already factored. So we want this factor, a minus 4, to equal 0. And you would have to add 4 to both sides, and a equals 4. It's the opposite of negative 4 because this is a 1a. So we just put 4 minus 4. Okay. Now, this one's a little different because we have a 4a plus 1. So we can't just plug in the opposite of 1 here. All right, but we write it as an equation. 4a plus 1 equals 0. You subtract 1 from both sides, and you have 4a equals negative 1. Well, the inverse of multiplying your variable times a constant is to divide by that constant. 4 divided by 4 is 1a equals, and then we divide the other side, negative 1 by 4, and we just end up with that fraction, negative 1/4, okay? So a equals negative 1/4 and 4. All right, the next. So I'm going to zoom in here on number 9 and 10, okay? This is what we worked on a lot in class. We're solving this quadratic, okay? X squared plus 9x plus 8. Since this is a 1x squared, all we have to do is find the factors of 8 that equal 9. Well, we're going to use 1 times 8, and they're both positive. So x plus 8, x plus 1. We set that equal to 0, and we solve each factor. X plus 8 equals 0. That would be x equals negative 8. X plus 1 equals 0. That would be x equals negative 1. And then in number 10, we're finding the factors of 5 that equal negative 6. And that's going to be negative 1 and negative 5, because when you multiply two negatives, you get a positive. And when you combine them, negative 1 and negative 5 is negative 6. So I've factored it here, and then I've shown you how to solve it, okay? Now, number 11 is a little bit more challenging. Number 11, you don't have all the terms on the same side of the equal sign, okay? So this looks a little busy here, but basically, I have my negative 7. This minus m squared, in order to make it positive, I'm basically going to move it over here, but I'm going to subtract m squared. I'm sorry, I've just rewritten it right here. Negative 7 equals negative m squared minus 6m. I'm going to add m squared to get rid of it over here, but I have to add m squared over here, but there's not an m squared at all. So that's why I just wrote it over here by itself. Then to get rid of minus 6m, I'm going to add 6m. Over here, I add 6m to nothing. And then we have a negative 7. So over here, everything cancels, and then I bring down my m squared, my 6m, and my minus 7, okay? And I set all that equal to 0. Another way to think of that is really you can just take this negative m squared over here and make it positive. Take this negative 6m over here and make it positive. And then again, we factor, and then and then these are the solutions, okay? So this problem is more about setting it up and setting it equal to 0 correctly. Okay, in number 12, b squared equals 4. Same thing. This really says what number squared equals 4, and some of you might already know that. That's 2, but it's also negative 2, because a negative 2 times a negative 2 is 4. But to write it out as an equation, we want to get the minus, we want to set it equal to 0, so I get rid of this plus 4 by subtracting 4 from both sides. But it doesn't say 1 minus 4. This is a b squared and a minus 4, so we just write that out. B squared minus 4 equals 0. Now this, b squared minus 4, is the difference of two squares. The square root of b squared is b. The square root of 4 is 2. But then we add those terms one time, b plus 2, and then we subtract b minus 2. The plus 2 and the minus 2 will cancel each other out because that's 0, and that's why we don't have a middle term. And then 2 times negative 2 is negative 4, okay? And then, of course, you just solve them by using the opposite of 2 is negative 2. The opposite of negative 2 is positive 2. All right, in 13 here, again, we've got to get all of the terms together on one side of the equation and set it equal to 0. So I did the inverse operations on the right side, and I did the same thing on the left side to keep the equation true. And we ended up with m squared plus 3m plus 2 equals 0. And then I factored this trinomial or this quadratic, and I used the factors of 2 that equal 3. That's 2 and 1. And then when you solve it, you get negative 2 and negative 1. And then on 14, Again, this is a bunch of terms. You need to get them all together, okay? So I did the inverse operations on the right side and did the same thing on the left so that I could keep the equation true. And when I did that, I ended up with this p squared plus 8p plus 12 equals 0. So I'm factoring this quadratic. The factors of 12 that equal 8. That's going to be 2 and 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 6 plus 2 is 8. I write it out as the separate binomials, and then I set them equal to 0. B plus 2, set that equal to 0, you would get negative 2. B plus 6, set that equal to 0, you get negative 6. All right. So now let's take a look at 17. All right. 17 is the difference of two squares, okay? And we've learned how to factor that. 25x squared, that's called a squared because 5 times 5 is 25. So the square root of this is actually 5x. 5x times 5x is 25x squared. 36 is a perfect square because 6 times 6 is 36. So I'm using 5x and 6. And because it's the difference of two squares, I'm going to add 5x plus 6 one time, and then I'm going to subtract 5x minus 6. And that's how you factor the difference of two squares. And this is multiple choice, but it says which expression is a factor. It doesn't have both of them, but you can see the 5x minus 6, and that answer would be B. All right. And number 18, again, it's a multiple choice question. You're actually asked which expression is equivalent. So one of these sets of binomials, basically if you find the product of all of these, one of them should be this. Or you could just remember how to factor this. X squared minus 23x minus 50. You're finding the factors of negative 50 that equal negative 23. I wrote the factors down. Remember, you can use your calculator if you need to, but we can use 25 times 2. And if we wanted to equal negative 23, we do the negative 25 plus 2. So our factors, x minus 25, x plus 2, that is your answer. And that answer looks like it is answer A. And then number 19, determine the product. You just multiply the first 3x times 4x, and you get 12x squared. 3x times negative 2 minus 6x. 4 times 4x is 16x, and 4 times negative 2 is minus 8. Combine your like terms in the middle, 16x minus 6x, or negative 6x plus 16x is 10x. 12x squared plus 10x minus 8. And then the last one, question number 20. It's multiple choice. It says which expression is a factor, okay? So it's not giving you both factors, it's just giving you one, so you're probably gonna have to work it out. Now this is a tough one, okay? 18x squared minus 15x plus 2. Because this, what we call leading coefficient, is greater than 1, it's 18, we actually have to multiply this a term times this c term. 18 times 2 is 36. So now we're finding the factors of 36 that equal negative 15. Here are the factors, and you'll notice the only ones that can equal 15 would be 12 and 3. We're going to make them both negative because a negative 12 combined with a negative 3 gives us that middle term of negative 15. And when you multiply a negative times a negative, you get the positive, okay? Now, the way that I've taught you to factor this, though, because this is a leading coefficient greater than 1, we just write all four terms, starting with the first term, 18x, and then the minus 12x, which came from here, the minus 3x, which came from here, and the plus 2, which was in the original, okay? So we just basically made the middle term into these two different ones. Now we're going to group the first two, 18x minus 12x, and we're going to group minus 3x plus 2. We group it in order to factor out a common factor. Well, 18 and 12 have a common factor of 6, and they both have an x. This should actually be an x squared. Maybe I can write that on there. That should be an 18x squared and an 18x squared. That way, we can factor out an x as well. So we factor out 6x, and what are we left with? Well, 6x times 3x will get us back to 18x squared, and 6x times negative 2 will get us to minus 12x, okay? Then you will actually see we have a negative 3x plus 2, and we can't really simplify that, but what we could do is factor out the negative 1, or the negative. Then we would have to multiply it times 3x to get negative 3x. And then negative 1 times negative 2 to get the positive 2. So in our final answer, you'll see here we have this common binomial of 3x minus 2, but that's not one of your answers. Okay, it's not one of the answers, but the other term we get from the 6x and the minus 1, and we put those together, 6x minus 1, and you will see that that's right here, 6x minus 1, and your answer is B. Okay, that's a review. Hopefully you found that helpful. If you do not, feel free to shoot me a message if you have any specific questions about this test.